Hare Krishna. My name is Aṭavi Kṛṣṇa Dās. I was born in Mexico, Guadalajara, October 13, 1976. And that was the day when Prabhupada gave a lecture in India, in Hindi, in a place called Chandigarh, I think. Anyway, I want to do this, narrating the story of how I came to Krishna consciousness as a way to express my gratitude and appreciation for all the people who brought me closer to God, either directly or indirectly. So first of all, some of the earliest memories I have from childhood were that when I was a kid, I used to eat peppermint leaves. My mother had a little garden outside of the house with roses, and when I was a child I used to go around and eat peppermint leaves. Well, the funny thing is that I was reminded of this fact later, years later, when I came in contact with the devotees and came in contact with Krishna consciousness, and I tasted tulsi leaves. So that was something that I remember from back then. When I was a child, I was constantly sick when I was a kid, and my mother used to take me to the doctor, so I came back home having had injections which made me suffer a lot. I used to come back crying, and it was like one of the early memories I have from childhood, which were like suffering and pain. And I also had a recurring nightmare. This is a funny thing that used to happen when I was a child, that I used to have this nightmare that it was it's difficult to describe. In fact, it's a bit inconceivable, because I used to dream of something that was huge, the size of an elephant, and at the same time it was just as small as the top of a pin. So it was kind of like inconceivable to have as a child this nightmare that was recurring. It used to happen like every so often, that something was big and small at the same time, and it was a bit strange. But anyway, I have to speak a little bit about my grandparents also, because they were the ones who encouraged me into a spiritual life, or at least religious life. And it's because my father was born in the border of United States and Mexico, and he came to Guadalajara. He moved to Guadalajara, where he married and had us children. So my grandparents used to visit from time to time and bring gifts from the United States. And one of the gifts that I received was the Noah's Ark. And it was very nice, because it was like the boat with Noah and his wife and all the different animals. It was like a toy, for children, but it was very nice. My grandparents told me the story of Noah. So I think from that on, I developed this sort of like I used to call it like spiritual or ecological spirituality, where I was always attracted to the things of nature, the wonders of nature, and it gave me a little bit of attraction to God as well, like the pastime of Noah's Ark, And that was it. Like my paternal grandparents were always, they never preached to me directly, but they were both very religious, and I always saw them that they were like either praying or reading some like book, some religious book. That was on my father's side. Then on my mother's side, my mom is from a village or a town here in close by to the city. And my maternal grandmother, she encouraged me. She actually like taught me. She taught me how to cross me. She taught me how to cross me, and she wanted to encourage me, to go and to do the first communion and all these things, But later, years later, I found out that my mother prevented my grandmother from encouraging us to go into spiritual life or religious life, because both my parents, they had bad experiences, or they were a bit rebellious with the way they were treated about religion, so they both decided to move away from religion. So when we were born, like me and my brothers, we were not educated with any religious inclination at all. My father, he's a psychiatrist. He was very inclined to religion and spirituality when he was younger, but because my grandfather was very religious, so he was as well. But when he entered high school and then started studying medicine, his mind changed. You know, the way he was thinking changed, and he was influenced by other authors and other ideas, socialism, other philosophers. So basically he lost faith, especially when he was like in medicine school, you know, like dissecting bodies and this kind of things, you know. It's where is the soul, you know? It's just a dead body. Anyway, we were never raised in religion, but my father always inculcated in us values, you know, such honesty and just try to be a good person and good citizen. And my mom, on her side, she was more like, you know, hard working and enjoying. Other than that, I didn't have much spiritual inclination, except for maybe like, I mean, I was more inclined to science, like my father. You know, my father is always surrounded by books, always reading and studying. And I became like kind of like a scientist, like he was. And even a bit challenging sometimes. And but when we were at my grandmother's house in this small village, there was a lot of interaction with uncles and cousins. Most of my cousins were male. They're all male cousin, older. So I always looked up to them. And there was one aunt in particular, my mother's sister, that she saw my inclination for atheism and kind of like challenging. So once she threatened me. She stated, one day God will appear to you, one day the Lord will manifest in your life, and then you will believe. Because I was like very challenging. So her statement was kind of like a threat. I felt like a threat, you know. But within myself, I always thought, I hope He does. I hope the Lord manifests in my life, you know, someday, you know. So for my whole life, I was always like waiting for that day for God to manifest. Waiting for that day, you know. Most of the time in a challenging mood, you know, sarcastic and challenging mood. We're always waiting for the Lord to manifest in my life. But he, like, I didn't have any significant experience on childhood, you know, except I had a friend who, as a kid, he already used to speak about the soul, you know, not with me, but with my father in other gatherings we had. And when I was as children, we had a very close friendship. His name is Simon Kras. His father was from Yugoslavia, and his mom is from Canada. And his mom, Eva Kras, she was vegetarian, or at least very much inclined to vegetarianism. So once they invited me for lunch to their house, and she gave me some, like, it was kind of like cake. It was like a vegetarian cake. So, and my friend told me that when you eat meat, it actually rots within your stomach before you digest it. So that was kept in me, although I didn't become vegetarian right away. But that, I remember that from childhood. And one of the experiences that was striking also in childhood was because here in Guadalajara there's an international book fair, and it's a yearly event that takes place where books are sold from editorials, you know, from all over the world, and it's a huge event here in the city. So when my father used to take us every year since this book fair began, and I remember one of my first visits there was a stand, there was a book stall. I don't know if it was ISKCON devotees or it was just some other religious tradition, but it was definitely some Indian religious tradition there that had like a display of books and pictures from India and stuff. And in particular, there was one monk explaining, because it was as an example, there were clothes lying on the ground. Maybe, I don't know if it's some Indian clothes or something, you know, but the monk was explaining that he was explaining this principle from the Bhagavad Gita. I mean, now I know that it's from the Bhagavad Gita, but he was explaining how the body is the vessel for the soul, and when we leave the body, when the soul leaves the body, is like throwing away worn clothes, you know. So that's why he was giving the graphic example by displaying these clothes lying on the floor, as if the body just lies there when the soul leaves, just as the body, you know, that verse Dehi nos minjata dehe, just as a person gives up new garments and takes up, just as a person gives up old garments and takes new ones, and similarly the soul passes away at the moment of death. A sober person is not bewildered by such a change. But I wasn't able to sort of accommodate that principle, you know. So maybe I became conscious of death as an early child after that experience, and I became really afraid of death. I remember even crying in my bed. I was once crying, you know, I don't want to die as a child, because I knew that I was going to die, you know, after that experience. But I was really afraid of death. And I went to my mom. I remember I told her I was afraid of death. I didn't want to die, and she just called me. She said, everybody has to die, you know. But it will happen after a long time, so don't worry. So maybe that's it gave me some solace at the time, you know. I remember as a child also I used to like write and publish my own books, you know. It was just for fun, but I used to do that as well. I just remembered. And anyway, from these experiences of death, when I was in junior high school, I had like a depression period. I sort of became depressed. I didn't know why. I couldn't really point the reason why. Maybe I was entering adolescence, so I became depressed. And I remember I used to start giving away my things, you know, like to my younger brother, which I was very close to. I started like giving away some of my valuables, you know, which were just like soda cans and these kind of things. But it was sort of like a spirit of renunciation, you know, that I started to give up things, because I just thought I was going to die. I didn't know how, but I just thought about it. Anyway, this depression just disappeared after some time. By the time we had already moved to a different house, a bigger house, and closer to a neighbor that was not very much developed. In fact, it was very close to a big park, big forest, so I used to go there very often. And I loved nature, you know. Since childhood I was very inclined, you know, to be in nature and always search for natural places. In fact, when I was even younger, also another child experience was one of my uncles, one of my father's cousins. He took us to a town, a village, where we had the opportunity to milk some cows. That was very beautiful. Later, when I remember, you know, because they took us as an early child, you know, as young children, they took us to milk some cows and to have some fresh milk and some raw milk. It was very nice. But then anyway, as time moved on and I then entered high school, this is a very interesting period of my life, because my father wanted me to go into this high school because it had some kind of like institutional agreement with the local university. So he thought that by me going into this high school, it would be easier for me to go into the local university. But little did he know, or nobody of us knew really, that this high school was actually like Catholic based. It was La Salle, and it was a religious institution. They actually had the whole school. It was like primary school, junior high school, and high school. So I entered into high school, and it was a big surprise that the first day of school there, one teacher came and it was like and he led us into a prayer to the whole group of kids there. So he was like, he said, let us remember that we are in the holy presence of God. Everybody had to repeat, let us worship Him. So it was like there was a 15-minute prayer that took place every morning for the whole period of 3 years that lasted high school. And so that was actually when I started my religious education, so to speak, you know, because I was exposed to religious teachings. I was exposed to, you know, to go into or to live in an environment, you know, that fostered spirituality or religious values, and definitely they did try to instill in us religious values. I remember once they showed us a documentary on abortion, which was very shocking, obviously to discourage us from practicing that. And at the time also, because it was my adolescence, and during this period of high school, I also started to develop this kind of like identity influenced by MTV and the music of the time, especially like the Mexican rock bands at the time, where they had a lot of religious images and religious references as well. So I started to grow my hair and start piercing my ears with earrings. In fact, one of the funny things I remember from back then also was that once my friends and I decided to just shave our heads, just out of fun, you know, because maybe there was another rock band who also had like shaved heads. So we decided just to buzz our heads. But the funny thing is, before I did that completely, because I had long hair, and then we wanted to just like get rid of the long hair and then let it grow again, you know. But before I shaved all up, I just left like a curl of hair on my front, on my forehead like this, you know, just a curly hair like this, just a bunch of hair in the front, you know, which is a bit funny, you know, because it's kind of like the Sika that we use now, but it was in the front. Anyway, at that time I started like learning how to play guitar, and I also wrote some songs. I wanted to develop these musical skills, and obviously wanted to form a rock band, you know, which was like it was the thing back then, you know. We wanted to make a rock band and write songs and play and sing. I loved singing, so I sang a lot, and a lot of it was influenced by this music of the time, and also some of the religious images and references that I was exposed to. And then that's how it went. And then when I finished high school, then I had another experience with my friend from childhood, this Canadian friend Simon Kras. He invited me to go to Canada with him, or either that or I arranged to go with him, because the idea was that I was going to go and learn English. It was my first experience away from home, outside of the country, and he and I, Simon and I, we both went to Winnipeg, Canada. He was going there for university. I went there to study English, and for a period of 6 months. It was in the summer of 1994. We arrived in Canada in the summer and stayed there for 6 months until the winter. And basically that was just for learning English and just and have fun. That's what we did. And yeah, it was a fantastic experience. I met people from all over the world. I made friendship with a group of Japanese, and I had friends from Turkey, from France, from Switzerland, from Greece, and other Mexicans as well. It was just a very nice group, you know, where we were learning English and just experiencing the Canadian culture. I became very much inclined to the music of the rock music of Canada back in those years. Became a big fan of bands. In fact, this is one I want to show you. A couple of experiences I had there in Canada was once we went for dinner to an Indian restaurant. That was the first time I was exposed to Indian food, and I remember it was very new experience for me, because I had never really tasted Indian food, you know. I just thought, wow, these flavors are amazing, you know. I've never tasted anything like it. So I thought that was interesting experience. Obviously that the restaurant had a big picture of the Taj Mahal and thing, you know, but that was my first exposure to Indian food, you know. And another thing is one of my favorite Canadian bands. I bought a t-shirt after a concert. This is one of the Canadian bands that was famous in Canada back then. And this t-shirt had this mantra printed on the back. And up till now, I don't know what it means. I never knew what it means. If somebody watches this video and could tell me what it means, I would appreciate it. But anyway, I loved it. I thought it was very interesting, and I thought if I ever get a tattoo, I would like to get this kind of like mantra, you know, in Sanskrit printed, tattooed on my arm. And like I thought it was interesting, but I really never dared to get a tattoo, you know. It was just part of what was back then, but I never really dared. But that was my experience in Canada, and then I came back to Mexico in 1995. So